Hey guys, Brass Facts here, and Nova. Wait, no, Jesse here, and Maze, with some brass facts on like some other guys. Today we're gonna talk about brass versus steel. So class, take out your notebooks. But seriously though, thank you guys for watching. There has been an overwhelming amount of support, more than I expected. So hopefully we can continue to make some videos that you guys love watching just as much as I love making. But without further ado, today's topic might be one that is almost as hot as a debate as AR versus AK, brass versus steel. Finally, an answer to the age-old question of which is better. And that answer is neither. I vote we go back to carrying around like propellants, wadding, bullets, and just smacking that shit in there. But seriously though, I do think there's a lot of misinformation around about steel, brass superiority, and hopefully today we can shed some light on the topic for you guys. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. Let's get started. So as far as bullet manufacturers, designers are concerned, the case has to be able to perform 4 basic purposes. First one's gonna be that it has to obturate the gases. It's gonna have to prevent any gas from being able to get back from the breech. Everything should be going forward and nothing coming out of the system. It has to be able to obviously protect the propellants. Should be able to withstand sequential rough handling. So your rounds, you wanna make sure that they can withstand all of that rocky transportation to whatever supply line you're going for, whether it's ammo store down the street or into the actual front lines. And then finally, it should be able to be readily extracted from the chamber once it's been fired. I think we all see extraction issues from time to time, so we'll give a little leeway on that one. Basically though, no system is good by itself. The case is just as important as the projectile, as the propellants, as the weapon system, and they all need to work together to get something that's actually going to perform as you expected. No case on its own can actually withstand the pressures that you see from firing, so it's going to rely on the chamber walls of whatever weapon system you're using for that support to help push those pressures in the proper direction, both down the barrel for the projectile and out of the weapon for extraction. So how did brass actually come to be? Basically around the 1870s, brass was picked as a kind of standard case, but certainly several other metal combinations, different alloys were tried well before this. And brass won out basically for one major property, its malleability. You consider old manufacturing lines and it was difficult to work the metals to get those shapes, to get those crimps, and brass being as malleable as it was, especially during those times, was a huge major benefit in terms of being able to make those consistent, reliable cases, something that you could work with without way too much effort having to go into the process. There's obviously a lot of other major benefits of brass, which we're gonna touch into as we continue through this video here, but steel ammo came to shine during World War II when this was becoming harder and harder to come by. It was more expensive. Things were limited. People were struggling and doing whatever they could. And a lot of us associate steel with Russia. The COMBLOC countries were able to set up these lines and use steel as a cheap alternative for them so that they can still provide ample munitions to their soldiers. Obviously after the war, the steel ammo was still manufactured. At this point, they already had the line set up, they had foolproofed out the system, and it made sense for them to continue using so because their weapons worked great with it, the lines were there, and it was a ready, cheap, and available means for them to put ammo out into the countries. Not to say that the United States didn't try working with steel. There was actually a lot of effort during World War II, but couldn't figure it out properly. So they let that dream die and just continued on with brass because, well, post-war, I guess the resources were more available, it worked, it was more consistent, and there was no need for them to move forward with those steel options, unlike the COMBLOC countries that already figured it out. Probably the major benefit that anyone who shoots steel is gonna tell you is it's cheap, unfortunately. Goodbye to the cheap steel days. You will be missed. Hopefully they can come back, PSA or something, I don't know, maybe help us out here, because I want to be able to fill my ammo cans with more cheap steel to run through. We'll do what we can on that one though. Before we bully steel too bad here, I am gonna give it one major advantage over brass. Basically, because that steel is so much harder and less malleable than brass, you can use that to your benefit, and it's able to withstand way higher pressures than its brass cased equivalent. So from a manufacturing and design perspective, you do get a bit more wiggle room in terms of being able to put in heavier loads of propellants, higher pressures, things like that, which, I mean, in standard rounds, we see the same kind of formulations. We want 5.56 to perform like 5.56, but from a novel perspective, maybe a bit more wiggle room, which is actually pretty cool. One big point of contention that people like to bash on steel for is that it's dirty, which, yes and no. Steel manufacturers, listen, what's coming into the States, you're buying like Wolf or Tula, which is cheap, which means it should be no surprise that the propellant being used is also kind of cheap, right? You're not buying the equivalent of steel Black Hills or Hornady or whatever. You're buying kind of bottom of the barrel steel manufacturers, which is fine and dandy, but you can't make those comparisons to your higher end stuff when you're not buying a higher end steel. We talk about brass in terms of malleability. Steel being dirty does come from that area. Because brass is more malleable, you're able to get that better seal around your projectile in that neck, better seals in the back and shaping and things like that, which means that when it is fired, the amount of unburnt propellant that's going to be left in the system is less. It's able to contain properly and burn off more, whereas with a steel round, this crimp here, this nice little connection point, it's going to be a lot harder to make that snug fit so that some of the gases are going to be put elsewhere in the system. Fine, you can clean your weapons, it's not inherently a problem. People think it's dirty because the propellants that are used are less than ideal in those circumstances. If you were to do a one-to-one, yeah, it might be dirtier in the sense that you need to clean your weapon systems more. But if you're shooting an AK with steel, who's cleaning your weapon system anyway? Just, you know, might not be the worst thing in the world. But because it's cheaper propellants, people like to not use it. It might do more damage, might be harsher on the metals, things like that. So since that steel doesn't expand as much when firing, you might notice more carbon going back into the system, resulting in what people say is lower pressures. They claim steel typically shoots lower, making less velocity. But this is something that designers and manufacturers can kind of circumvent. One option that you see a lot of people doing is adjusting the projectile seating depth. An example of this that you guys might be familiar with is that old school Remington UMC 9mm. So you might feel that the kind of projectile to case connection point is a little weird, which is them having the projectile in a little bit deeper. So they're allowed to adjust the headspace between where that gas is able to burn and change essentially the burn rate, the pressures, the velocities, just by adjusting that little gap in between, you know, where the propellant sits and the projectile kind of meet, that air gap in there. Another option that you see a lot of manufacturers take is maybe just using a different propellant to begin with, right? They all have different burn rates, they all have different properties, so they might swap out just for something else to compensate. And another very common alternative is just putting in more propellant, you know, use the same one but charge it a little bit higher. If you guys shoot steel, you might have some experience with this one. Depending on your barrel length, you might see some sparks coming out. This round here, actually, a lot of experience shooting pistols with this and getting sparks out the front, which can be very pretty. Looks nice under night vision, but that's really what you're seeing is that little extra soup up in propellant coming out the system. Another issue people like to rag on steel for is that steel obviously can rust, which means that these rounds have to have some kind of coating on them. You see a lot of brass with some coating, not always, it's usually thin, but no way around it, steel has to have this. And it comes in a lot of different flavors, right? You can see some rounds like this, that is a thick ass lacquer coating. This doesn't even look like steel at this point. Something like this though, right? You have your little copper wash and thin lacquer kind of wash on top of it just to give it a little extra protection. But what I think you see more commonly with steel nowadays, at least, is something standard like this, which, while it does have a thin coat, it is protected, it's not going to be super gunky on the system. People like to say that the lacquer, as you fire, as it gets hotter, will come off and kind of disrupt your barrel. Rounds like this, you're not going to really see that as much anymore on. And lacquer technology has gotten better, so really the rounds that are gonna be melting into your barrel are like super thick like this one, and old school lacquers that just, they didn't know what they were doing. But you can actually see the benefits, right? I have a bunch of cases right here, and you can kind of see the green tinge on this one because of the thin lacquer coating. But it's been on the dirt spent case for a very long time now, and you can see it has minimal rust. I mean, I can scratch most of this off its surface. It's not going to actually impact. The lacquer coating will come off eventually, will wear down, but compared to a round like this, I mean, that's a nightmare. You're probably not going to want to shoot that afterward. So it does do a good job protecting it. People do like to give it hate though because of its interaction with the barrel. Could potentially impact your life cycle of your weapon system. It's a give or take. Like I said, you can find brass ammo that has, you know, some kind of coating on it, which in the instance of brass, it's going to be just for the sake of lubrication. Steel needs to help do waterproofness, help prevent rust. But modern lacquers are usually more polymer-based, polymer coatings. So it really does act as lubrication in that sense as well. You want to reduce as much friction as possible throughout the system. The old wives' tale of steel, you know, gunking up things is, it's old steel. It's rounds that have those thick, massive coatings on them, which you're really not seeing anymore. So that's not going to be an actual concern. People like to say that steel is dirtier, which, if you're shooting it out of an AR, that's probably just your AR. They do work better with clean propellants. It's putting that gas back into the receiver. It's just an inherent difference of the weapon systems. Another big reason people like to hate on steel is because they say it's not as reliable, which is another area of a misconception. Because if you're shooting it out of like a comm block weapon system, like an AK, something that was designed to work with steel, you're not going to really see these problems. Like I had said before, there's variability in the manufacturing processes. If you're shooting something that's not a typical steel system, you're going to be a lot more impacted by these minor manufacturing nuances. But if you're shooting out of an AK, you're really not going to see the impact of shooting something like Tula versus something that might be a higher end steel round, because these weapons were designed to just eat through whatever was put through them. And you don't care if there's little nuances, little less consistencies in their process. There's no impact on little to no impact on the actual performance of the weapon system. Anecdotally here, I have shot plenty of steel through like a BCM or an Arrow or a Stag with little to no issues. And that's not to say that you can't see problems, haven't seen problems, but realistically, there's a lot of studies out there and it's showing that steel will run through still with like a 99.9% reliability rate. So you might get a failure to extract or something, but it's not going to be this doom and gloom thing that everyone's telling you where like every other shot's going to be a failure. And if you're running it out of an AR system and you are experiencing problems, that's going to be a limitation of the weapon that you're using. Not that they're bad, but ARs are inherently designed to have a lighter extraction mechanism, which, light extraction mechanism on that hard case steel is kind of setting it up for problems because it can't withstand that force that is needed to get steel out of there properly. Again, why you don't see issues in steel designed weapons like AKs, but you might see them more on AR systems where that extraction wasn't designed to withstand that type of force. Conversely though, if you are running like an AK, you might see problems with brass for that exact reason. Because the extraction mechanism is a bit harder and the brass will feel a bit more of those forces, it can wind up deforming the brass on its way out and causing some of that obstruction, not allowing it to come out properly. So to the people who do shoot comm block weapon systems, you probably do want to use steel and probably do have a lot better experiences with steel for those reasons. There's actually an issue that I was experiencing when the steel ammo ban went into place. Trying to fire brass through my Sega was definitely causing a lot of problems, which thankfully, I don't know if things just wore into place better or what, doesn't seem to be too much of an issue anymore. But to anyone who has those comm block weapons, you can definitely relate to this one, I'm sure. Another big issue people like to hate on steel for is reloadability, right? Which it's not. Steel is designed for a one-time use, and technically you can reload it. It's gonna beat the hell out of any of your equipment, and you're not going to want to. So if you're a reloader, if you're wartime and really need some extra help with getting resources, brass allows you to have more than one use, whereas there's no getting around this. Steel is gonna be a one and done. So while brass is not inherently better, steel is not inherently bad, there definitely are some benefits and drawbacks depending on what you personally might be shooting. I'm not gonna sit here and say, don't shoot steel, it's terrible, it's gonna destroy your systems, because for me, it works, especially when it was cheaper. We all like an affordable range day. But conversely, if you are much more sensitive to taking care of your weapons, cleaning them, keeping them extremely pristine, you're probably gonna want to run brass through. It's just the nature of what you're using, depending on different weapon systems, depending on different manufacturers, but there is no actual problem with one or the other. Any issues that you see in functionality are more or less gonna be issues that you see between manufacturers, or just the weapon system that you're using might not be ideal for the ammo that you're running through it. But really, at the end of the day, use whatever ammo works for you, If steel is running great and you're having no problems, more power to you. Don't let keyboard warriors tell you that it's bad, because whether it's the type of ammo you're using, whatever weapon you're using, as long as you as the shooter are comfortable or are making successful shots and having a good time doing it, then sounds to me like you found exactly what you need to shoot. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you learned a little something about steel, brass. Maybe I swayed some of your opinions and hate towards steel, but see you guys next time. Hope you enjoyed watching.